I built their entire brand with 1.5 million followers, but they fired me, so I became the brand. I was sitting in a parking garage, engine off, hands still gripping the steering wheel, when I realized what I had done. My phone was in my lap. The TikTok app was open, and in the span of 45 seconds, I had just locked a multi-million-dollar corporation out of the account I had bled for over 8 months. My chest was heaving. My eyes were dry, not because I wasn't crying, but because I had already cried everything out on the elevator ride down from the 14th floor. The security guard had watched me with this look on his face, somewhere between pity and discomfort, while I carried a sad little cardboard box with my desktop plant, my favorite mug, and the sticky note a coworker had written me on my first week that said, "You're going to do great things here." I had shoved that sticky note in the box without looking at it. Now I was sitting in this concrete tomb of a garage, fluorescent light flickering above me, and I looked down at my phone. The account name had changed. The bio had changed. The email tied to it, mine, always had been. The phone number used for two-factor authentication, my personal cell. The one ringing off the hook right now with a number I didn't recognize, a 212 area code, New York, corporate. I let it ring, and then I drove home. Let me take you back to the beginning, because if I just tell you the ending, you won't understand the kind of rage that powers a decision like that. You won't understand how a 22-year-old girl who graduated college with a marketing degree and a head full of dreams ended up sitting in a parking garage dismantling a company's entire digital presence in under a minute. You need to understand what they took from me first. I graduated in May. By June, I was sending out applications like I was throwing pennies into a fountain, wishing on every single one. The job market was a war zone. Every entry-level position wanted 3 to 5 years of experience. Every internship paid in exposure. Every LinkedIn recruiter who messaged me ghosted me the second I asked about compensation. By mid-July, I was living back at home, sleeping in my childhood bedroom with the glow-in-the-dark stars still on the ceiling that I'd put up when I was 9, staring at them at 2 in the morning wondering if I had made a catastrophic mistake choosing this field. That's when I saw the posting. Marketing intern, retail brand, flexible hours, opportunity for growth. The company was called Harwick & Brand. If you've never heard of them, that tracks, because at the time they were about as relevant as a fax machine at a tech startup. They sold mid-range home goods. Think throw pillows, scented candles, those chunky knit blankets that every white girl's apartment had in 2019. Their vibe was stuck in that era too. Their Instagram hadn't been updated since February. Their Facebook still had a pinned post from a holiday sale. They didn't have a TikTok. They barely had a pulse. But the listing said, opportunity for growth, and my rent-free living situation was starting to feel like quicksand, pulling me down slowly while my mother casually mentioned every 3 days that her friend's daughter was already working at a PR firm downtown. So I applied. I got a call the next morning. The woman on the phone was named Diane, the HR coordinator, and she was warm and enthusiastic in a way that felt genuine. She told me they were really excited about the direction they were taking the brand, and that they were looking for someone young and creative who understood the current social media landscape. I told her I had grown my own personal TikTok to about 40,000 followers in college by posting marketing breakdowns and brand analysis videos. She made a sound like I had just told her I could walk on water. I should have charged more. I came in for the interview. The office was on the 14th floor of a downtown building, and it looked like it hadn't been renovated since 2003. Beige carpets, drop ceilings, a water cooler that made a sound like a dying animal every time someone used it. The receptionist had a nameplate that said Linda, and Linda looked at me over her reading glasses like I was a puzzle she hadn't decided whether to solve. Diane walked me back to the conference room, and that's where I met him. Richard Harwick, CEO, founder, and, I would come to learn, the single most stubborn human being I had ever encountered in my 22 years on this planet. He was maybe 63, 64, silver hair, aggressively center-parted. One of those guys who wore a full suit to the office every day as a statement, not a necessity. His handshake was the kind that says I need you to know I'm in charge before you even sit down. He looked at my resume for approximately 4 seconds before setting it down and folding his hands on the table. So, he said, you're the TikTok girl. I told him yes, I had significant experience growing social media audiences organically, with a specific focus on short-form video content and trend-responsive marketing strategies. He blinked. Right, he said, the TikTok girl. I should have walked out. But I was 22 and I needed the job, and I told myself that maybe, I could make this work. Maybe I could prove something. Maybe I could take this stagnant little brand and shake it until something valuable fell out. And the thing is, that's exactly what I did. The pay was $14 an hour. No benefits. No contract beyond the standard internship agreement, which Diane handed me in a manila folder that had a coffee ring on the front like it had been sitting on someone's desk since the Obama administration. I noticed there was no clause in it about intellectual property. No clause about digital asset ownership. No clause about anything, really. It was 3 pages that said, in essence, you work here, you get paid, you don't steal our stuff. I signed it. Diane shook my hand. Richard didn't look up from his phone. I started the following Monday. The first thing I did was conduct what I called a brand autopsy. I went through every piece of content they had ever published on every platform, cataloged the engagement metrics, identified what had worked and what had tanked, and wrote a 12-page report that I presented to Richard in our first official meeting. He flipped to the last page, looked at the summary, and said, "So we need more followers." I took a slow breath through my nose. "What we need," I said, as carefully as I could, "is a coherent content strategy that builds authentic community engagement and converts viewers into loyal customers. Follower count is a byproduct of that, not the goal itself." He stared at me. "So," he said, "we need more followers." I learned very quickly that Richard operated in a world of simplified outputs. He didn't want to understand the engine. He wanted to see the car move. So I stopped explaining and started doing. The company had no TikTok account. When I asked about setting one up, Richard waved his hand like I was asking about a minor administrative task and said to handle it. When I asked for a company email to register it under, Diane apologetically told me that the company's official email system was in the middle of a transition, which, I later figured out, meant they had switched providers and IT was still sorting out the new domain 6 weeks later. When I asked for a company phone number to use for the 2-factor authentication setup, Richard's assistant checked with him and came back saying to just use my personal number for now, they'd update it later. They never updated it. I registered the TikTok account under my personal email address and my personal cell phone number because I was told to handle it and those were the tools I had. I named the account at Harwick Home. I set up the profile, and then I got to work. I want to be honest about what the next 8 months looked like, because I think people here went viral and imagined something effortless. Like the algorithm just smiled on you one day and handed you 1 million followers as a gift. That is not what happened. What happened was 60-hour weeks. What happened was me sitting on my bedroom floor at 11:30 on a Wednesday night, editing a 45-second video for the 3rd time because the cut wasn't landing right. What happened was me developing an intricate content calendar, studying competitor accounts, identifying sound trends sometimes 12 to 18 hours before they peaked so I could have content ready to publish at exactly the right moment. What happened was me learning, through trial and error and exhaustive research, exactly what made someone stop scrolling. I built a content pillar strategy around 3 themes: home transformation, before and afters, cozy lifestyle content that tapped into the nesting aesthetic trending among millennials and older Gen Z, and what I called affordable luxury, showing how their products could make a regular apartment look like a magazine spread. The first video that took off was one I filmed in my own apartment. I had bought 2 of Harwick's chunky throw blankets with my own money. I filed an expense report that Richard never approved, and I spent a Sunday afternoon rearranging my living room and filming the transformation. The audio was a trending sound. The lighting was my ring light from college. The caption was punchy and specific. It got 1.2 million views in 4 days. I remember sitting at my desk when the notification hit 500K and my hands started shaking. Not from nerves. From something else. That specific electricity you feel when you realize something you made is spreading through the world faster than you can track it. Diane came over and hugged me. Richard looked at the number and said, "Can we get that on Facebook too?" I did not throw my stapler at him, which I think deserves some kind of medal. The account grew. 30,000 followers. 100,000. We started getting tagged by home decor influencers. Interior design accounts with massive audiences were reposting our content. The online sales numbers started climbing. By month 4, Harwick and Brand's website was getting more traffic from TikTok than from any other source, including Google. By month 6, the marketing budget that had previously been split between a dying email campaign and a Google ad strategy from 2018 was being restructured because, and I'm quoting the finance guy, not myself, whatever Haley's doing is the only thing working. At 7 months, we hit 1 million followers. I went to Richard's office. I stood in the doorway. He had a standing rule about knocking even when the door was open, which I had forgotten exactly once, and I knocked. He looked up. "We hit 1 million, I said. He nodded. He said, "Good." He went back to his email. I stood there for another 3 seconds. Then I left. That night I applied to 4 full-time jobs and then closed my laptop without submitting any of them, because the truth was, I didn't want to leave. That sounds insane in retrospect, but I was genuinely proud of what I had built. I had taken a brand that was essentially invisible to anyone under 40 and made it matter to an audience of over 1 million people. I had done that. And part of me, the 22-year-old part, the ambitious, maybe naive part, thought that had to count for something. I told myself I'd give it one more month. I'd hit a milestone, and then I'd ask for what I deserved. We hit 1.5 million followers in month 8. And on that Friday morning, I put on the best blazer I owned, walked into Richard's office, knocked on the open door, sat down across from him without being invited to, and laid out my case. I had a folder. I had printed everything. The follower growth chart, the website traffic attribution, the sales data, cross-referenced against our content publishing calendar so the correlation was undeniable. I had a one-sheet showing the industry standard salary for a social media manager with proven results in my tier, which ranged from $45,000 to $55,000 annually. I pushed the folder across his desk. I'd like to discuss converting my role to a full-time salaried position, I said. My voice was steady. I had practiced. Based on the results I've generated over the past 8 months, I believe I've demonstrated significant value to the company, and I'd like to be compensated accordingly. I'm asking for $42,000 annually to start. I had actually gone below market rate because I wanted to give him room to feel like he'd negotiated something. Richard looked at the folder. He picked it up. He opened it. He looked at the follower chart for a long moment. And then he laughed. Not a polite chuckle. Not an uncomfortable laugh. A full, leaning back in his chair, hand on his chest laugh, like I had said something genuinely hilarious. The heat started in my neck, crept up the back of my skull. 42,000, he repeated, like he was tasting the absurdity of it. That's below market rate for Haley. He set the folder down. He folded his hands. You're an intern. I've been generating. You've been posting videos, he said. My nephew posts videos. He's 19. I'm going to bring him in. You can train him for a week, and he'll handle the account going forward. The room went very quiet. Or maybe everything went quiet inside me, in the specific way that happens when you hear something so wrong that your brain needs a full second to process it. You're firing me, I said. I'm ending the internship, he said, which was always temporary. That was in your agreement. You're replacing me with your nephew. He's family, Richard said, with a shrug that communicated he couldn't fathom why that needed further explanation. Now, I'll need the account password before you go. Diane can walk you through the offboarding. The account password, I repeated. For the TikTok. The password. He said it slowly, like I might be hard of hearing. And here is where I need to pause, because this is the moment. Not the revenge. Not the locked account. Not the lawyers. This moment. This is where the story actually turns. Because standing in that office, listening to this man say the word password, to me like I was a piece of software he was uninstalling, something in my brain clicked into place with the precision of a deadbolt. His nephew. He was going to hand 1.5 million followers, an asset worth, by conservative industry estimates, somewhere in the neighborhood of several $100,000 in brand equity, to a 19-year-old with no strategy, no experience, and no understanding of what had built it, purely because that 19-year-old shared his last name. And he was going to do it rather than pay me $42,000. Rather than pay me for what I had already given him. I thought about the expense reports he'd never approved, the 60-hour weeks, the Sunday afternoons on my bedroom floor, the 1.2 million view video that I had made with my own money, in my own apartment. And then I thought about something else. Whose email is that account registered to? Whose phone number gets the two-factor authentication texts? I picked up my folder from his desk. I'll be in touch about the password, I said, and I walked out. Wait, it gets worse. Because at this point, you might be thinking Richard was just a bad boss making a bad call. A greedy, short-sighted corporate dinosaur, sure, but maybe not a villain. Maybe just a man too set in his ways to value what he had. And then I found out what he said to Diane after I left. I didn't find out right away. I found out 3 weeks later, when Diane texted me from her personal phone because she had handed in her own resignation and felt I deserved to know. She told me that after I left his office that Friday, Richard had turned to her and said, and she quoted him directly, "That's the problem with these kids. They do 6 months of Instagram posts and think they're entitled to a salary. Send security to walk her out. 6 months of Instagram posts. 8 months. 1.5 million followers. Multi-channel growth strategy. Documented sales impact." And what I had done, in his mind, was Instagram posts. But I didn't know that yet when I was sitting in the elevator with my cardboard box and my glow-in-the-dark star childhood bedroom waiting for me at home. What I knew, in that elevator, was this: the TikTok account at Harwick Home was registered to haleymarketing@gmail.com. Two-factor authentication was tied to my personal cell. The password was something I had said and never shared, because Richard had never asked and didn't understand why it would matter. I knew TikTok's terms of service. I had read them, the way you read them when you're managing an account professionally and you want to understand the platform's rules. An account belongs to whoever controls the verified credentials. There was no digital asset assignment agreement in my internship contract. No IP clause specific to social media accounts. Nothing that legally transferred ownership of an account I had personally registered to the company. I had done my research by the time I reached the parking garage. I opened TikTok. I changed the password. I updated the recovery email. I changed the phone number to a Google Voice number I had set up in the elevator. I'd thought of that while the security guard was watching me with that look. I changed the account's display name. And then I changed the bio. Haley Lifestyle and Marketing Building in Public. Business inquiries. My email. By the time I changed the profile picture to one of me, the account was mine in every technical and legal sense of the word. My phone started ringing. 212 area code. I let it ring. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant. I want to tell you that I drove home blasting something victorious and pumped my fist and celebrated. I felt sick, not guilty. I want to be very clear about that distinction, because I have been asked about it many times since, and guilt implies I believed I had done something wrong. I didn't. I don't. What I felt was the specific nausea that comes from a conflict you didn't want to have, a line you didn't want to cross, a situation that forced you to choose between your dignity and your patience. I had been patient for 8 months. My mother was awake when I got home. She took one look at my face and my cardboard box and put the kettle on without saying anything. I sat at the kitchen table and I told her everything. When I got to the part about the password, she got very quiet. Is that legal? She asked. I spent 2 hours in the elevator researching it, I said. According to their terms of service and without any IP assignment agreement in my contract. Haley, it's mine, Mom. She looked at me for a long time. And then she said, okay. The calls kept coming all weekend. I didn't answer. On Saturday morning, I received an email from Harwick and Brand's legal team. They had, apparently, retained outside counsel with impressive speed for a company that couldn't approve a $60 expense report, informing me that the account was property of Harwick and Brand, and demanding I return access immediately or face legal action. I forwarded the email to a lawyer, a real one. She was a friend of a friend, a sharp woman in her early 30s who specialized in digital media and IP law, and she read the email and my internship contract and TikTok's terms of service in about 20 minutes. Then she called me. They have no case, she said. Not without an IP assignment agreement. They're threatening to sue. They can threaten, she said, but their own counsel will tell them the same thing I'm telling you. Without a contract specifically assigning digital asset ownership, the account belongs to whoever controls the registered credentials, which is you, and has been you from day one. What if they argue I created it in the scope of my employment? They can argue it, but courts have been inconsistent on that specifically for social media accounts, and without a written agreement to point to, it's an uphill battle they're unlikely to fund for an account they could have just contractually secured from the start. There was a pause. Did anyone at the company ever ask you to sign anything about digital IP? No. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Then they have a very expensive lesson on their hands and not much else. I sat with that for a moment. So what do I do? Exactly what you're doing, she said. Keep the account. Document everything. Don't respond to their legal threats without counsel. And maybe, she paused, maybe don't antagonize them publicly until this settles. I agreed. I also, that same Saturday, posted my first official video as a personal lifestyle and marketing creator. It was simple. Just me, at my kitchen table, talking directly into the camera. No script. No lighting rig. Just the ring light from college and the truth. I didn't name the company. I didn't need to. I said, I spent 8 months building something from nothing. When I asked to be compensated fairly for what I'd built, I was laughed at and shown the door. So I kept what was legally mine. If you're a young creator working for a company that doesn't value you, read your contract carefully, and understand your digital rights. This is my channel now. Let's build something real. I posted it and closed my laptop and went to sleep. When I woke up, it had 4 million views. The DMs were unmanageable. Creators I had followed for years were sharing it. The comments section was a wall of people who had experienced something similar. People who had built things for bosses who had then tried to claim those things. People who had been laughed out of salary conversations. People who had been told they were just interns, while generating measurable, documentable, significant results for companies that saw them as line items to be cut. I read comments for 2 hours and I cried for most of it, not from sadness, from the strange, overwhelming sensation of feeling seen on a massive scale. The account crossed 2 million followers that week. The legal situation resolved in a way that Richard's lawyers clearly found embarrassing to deliver. They sent a final letter, approximately 6 weeks after the initial threat, which stated in carefully formal language that after reviewing the relevant documentation, Harwick and Brand did not believe litigation was the appropriate avenue for resolving the matter, and wished me well in my professional endeavors. My lawyer translated. They looked at the contract, looked at TikTok's terms of service, looked at the fact that you registered the account with your personal credentials because they told you to, and their counsel told Richard he had spent however much on legal fees to confirm that he had no case. I asked if I should respond. No need, she said. It's over. I thought about Richard. I thought about the way he'd laughed. The way he'd said these kids, apparently, after I walked out. The way he'd waved his hand when I asked for a company email, as though the detail was beneath him. The way he'd said the word password to me like I was a malfunctioning appliance. I thought about his nephew. I later heard through industry channels, because the marketing world is smaller than people think, and word travels, that the nephew had lasted 3 weeks before the account's performance cratered without its content strategy, and that Richard had eventually hired an agency at a cost that was, apparently, significantly more than $42,000 a year. I didn't feel vindicated when I heard that. I felt tired in the specific way that comes from being right about something you wish you'd been wrong about. Here's what I will tell you about the 8 months that followed. I built a media brand. Not out of spite, or not only out of spite, because I'm human and I'd be lying if I said the revenge didn't add some fuel to the engine in those early weeks, but mainly out of the thing that had driven me from the beginning, the genuine, almost compulsive need to build something. The lifestyle content performed well. The marketing content performed better. I started breaking down brand strategies on TikTok, explaining, in plain language, how companies like Harwick and Brand were losing the war for young consumer attention, and what actually worked. My audience ate it alive. I launched a newsletter. I started consulting. I got offered a brand deal from a home goods company that was, poetically, a direct Harwick competitor, a deal that paid me more in 1 month than I had made in 8 months at Harwick and Brand combined. I signed that contract very carefully. Every clause, every IP provision. I thought about Diane sometimes. She had been kind to me in the way that people who are trapped in bad systems are often kind to the people around them, as a form of quiet apology for the system itself. I reached out to her after she resigned. She was consulting now too. I thought about the security guard and his look of pity. I thought about that sticky note, "You're going to do great things here," and how I had shoved it in the box without looking at it. I found it when I finally unpacked the box, 3 days after I got home. I had set it on my desk and I hadn't thrown it away, which felt like its own kind of answer. The person who wrote it wasn't wrong. They just had the wrong, here. There's one more thing I need to tell you, because I've given you the victory and I've given you the drama, and I want to give you the real part too. The part that doesn't go in the viral clip. I was scared. For a long time, I was genuinely scared. Not of Richard. Not of the legal threat, once my lawyer had weighed in. What I was scared of was the story people would tell about me. The ambitious young woman who couldn't just be grateful. The intern who stole an account. The Gen Z girl who just wanted clout. I knew how easy it was to flip the narrative. I had built narratives for a living. I knew exactly how Richard could spin it if he chose to, and I knew that no matter what the legal truth was, public perception could be its own kind of punishment. And some people did spin it that way. There were comment sections on articles about the story, because yes, it eventually became an article, several of them, where people called me entitled, said I had violated trust, said that regardless of the legal technicalities, I knew who had intended to own that account. I sat with those comments, not to punish myself, because I think sitting with the hardest version of a criticism is the only honest way to know whether it's true. And here's what I kept coming back to. I registered that account with my personal credentials because the company told me to handle it and gave me no company resources to do it with. I had no IP agreement. I had no contract provision. I had no salary, no benefits, no path to full-time employment, and ultimately, no future at that company at all, because the moment I asked to be valued, I was dismissed and replaced with someone whose only qualification was a shared last name. What I did was legal. What I did was within the terms of service of the platform. What I did was the direct result of a man who didn't understand the tools he was relying on, didn't respect the person operating those tools, and didn't protect his company's interests with basic due diligence. What I did, in the end, was keep something that was mine. I'm not asking you to call me a hero. I'm not even sure I'd call myself that. But I will ask you this. When a 22-year-old works 60-hour weeks for minimum wage, builds a multi-million-dollar asset from nothing, asks to be compensated fairly, and gets laughed at and shown the door, at what point does protecting yourself stop being revenge and start being survival? And the man who lost a 1.5 million follower account because he wanted to save $42,000, is he the cautionary tale about Gen Z entitlement, or about the kind of old guard arrogance that hands someone all the tools and all the access and none of the respect, and then acts shocked when she uses them? Tell me what you think, because I'm genuinely curious how you see it.
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, Then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.